Good. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for sharing your afternoon with us and happy summer. I hope everyone is doing well. My name is Danny Lauer. I'm the Assistant Director and Coordinator of Adult and Alumni Career Resources here in the GVSU Career Center. If you haven't done so already, please introduce yourself in the chat. We'd love to know your name, your graduation year, and why you're interested in today's session. So today's webinar is hosted in partnership with the GVSU Alumni Relations team and the Career Center. And we are committed to supporting you in your lifelong learning, your professional growth, and these types of webinars are just one way that we get to do that. So if you've attended any of our previous webinars over the last year or so, you might notice this format today is just a little bit different. So for the summer, we wanted to switch things up a bit and do kind of a virtual Q&A. So today we have two career advisors from the GVSU Career Center here with us, Katie Cwiakala and Meghan Veltri. And many of you submitted questions when you RSVP'd, and we are going to be answering those kind of grouped by theme. So, we've divided them up into kind of some very popular career buckets, and we're going to just kind of go through your questions and share some hopefully good career tips and wisdom. And then if we have some time at the end, we're going to go ahead and take additional questions at that time. Just a reminder, if we do get that time at the end, to keep your questions broad. There's a lot of us here on the call, so we want to try to make things as applicable to everyone in the audience as possible. So just kind of a heads up on that as well. Before I turn it over to Katie and Meghan for intros, I just want to stress just a couple Zoom etiquette rules. Like I said, this webinar is being recorded and we will share this with you after we wrap up today. If you do need to conduct any business out of the Zoom, please make sure to mute your microphone, turn off your camera in order to do that. And yeah, use the chat if you need anything throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here. And welcome Katie and Meghan. So Katie, would you be good to start in introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name is Katie Cwiakala, and I'm one of the advisors in the Career Center here at Grand Valley. I work primarily with our business and management students, sport management, and hospitality and tourism management. And then I'm also a graduate from Grand Valley's higher education program in 2023. So, very excited to be answering some questions today.
Awesome. Meghan, would you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi Lakers. My name is Meghan Veltri. I'm a career advisor at the Career Center. I work with our healthcare students. Prior to that, I worked with undecided students, and I've also helped with students who maybe are looking to make a transition of sorts if their original career path didn't work out and they're looking to make a change. That is something that we've helped students with at the Career Center, and I know that's been a question here today, so we'll be talking about that a bit more, and I'm also a two-time alum as well.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just dive right into some of our questions. So we are going to start with kind of questions around job searching. These were a lot of the questions that you sent in through your RSVP form. It had to do with, just struggles maybe around the job search, some questions around how that all works. So the first question is kind of around not learning any or like not getting anywhere with your job application. So this individual asked about kind of applying to a lot of places and not really hearing back, not getting any interview requests or any jobs. Wondering like what might be going wrong? Where could they maybe improve on their application materials, resume, cover letter to help them be a little bit more successful in that process? So whoever would like to tackle that one first, what advice do you have for them?
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, I just want to normalize that this is a very common question that we get at the Career Center. I think, especially with the implementation of AI and job searching, that is almost a whole new skill that you have to learn about. And so one of the things that we recommend is really being strategic with your job search. And when it comes to applying for positions, we really recommend tailoring your materials. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. So when we're talking about your resume and cover letter, this might be the first interaction that an employer has with you. So we want them to be neat, clean, easy to read, no spelling and grammar mistakes. Those are kind of our general rules for resume writing. but you have to look at the job description too. If you see the job posting, you want to align as much with that job posting as you can to help you get through applicant tracking systems. And so one of the ways that you can do that, you can match some of the vocabulary that you see on there. Now that doesn't have to be word for word, but if they are showing a skill, if they're listing some sort of skill or technology, something that you have done before, and that's not on your resume, you want to mirror some of that language. So that way, when the applicant tracking system were to review your resume, you would be hitting those points in there. So that's one minor thing, but pretty significant thing that you can do. You also want to make sure that you're tailoring for the experiences, right? So you might have your experience that you've had, you might have different versions of your resume. So it might highlight some of your experiences in different ways. You could do a skills resume. You can also really focus on maybe on one resume, you're emphasizing one experience that you've had more than another based on the position that you're applying to. So what we really recommend is that you do a lot of work on the front end, which we know can be tedious and time consuming, but it's much better than what we often see people do is just posting their one resume to LinkedIn and then just clicking through a bunch of jobs. That is not as effective of a search process to be utilizing. And I know Katie's got more to add to that too. So that's just kind of some initial starting points.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Megan's saying as well, I think overall, your circumstances can vary job to job too. So different companies have different things that they're looking for. That tailoring really does go a long way up front. And I do think adding a cover letter to your applications as well, it's really kind of dependent on the company on whether they're reading those in that initial hiring process or not. But it does give you the chance to show that you're taking that initiative to take that extra step in the application, as well as being able to explain your experiences in a more personal manner too. It lets me see as a hiring manager who you are, kind of what your passion areas are, why you're interested in that work, why you're interested in that company beyond just the skills that you're highlighting on your resume. And I do think sometimes as well, when you are applying and maybe facing that rejection or not getting to that interview stage, something that can be helpful as well is really just interacting with that recruiter or that hiring manager if you have the opportunity to, and asking them some questions about how you could improve that application in the future. And we do know that that's a little bit scary. Sometimes you're reaching out to somebody asking for maybe some critical feedback, but we can get really good advice from that too. And they're the ones who are making those decisions. And so I think that can be a really good strategy too, if you're hitting the same kind of roadblock each time, to really see what are some steps I could maybe take in future applications to have that success.
Katie mentioned the cover letter, and we know that those can be very tedious to write, but they can be very useful. The resume is where you can brag all about yourself, but the cover letter is really where you are selling yourself to the employer in the sense that you are letting them know why you would be a good fit for that organization. And the way you can articulate that is by doing career research and really knowing why you would be a good fit for an organization. So if you are just sending the same cover letters out and to a variety of companies, right, it might read really generic. The way that you can personalize your cover letter to that company is by mentioning something specific about that company, something that would showcase that you've done some research or that you've networked with someone before at that company. That can really help them show that you, or help you show that you've done the research, but it also connects the dots for them. You don't want to leave the employer having to guess or wonder. Just directly make those connections for them, and that hopefully will strengthen your overall materials that you're sending them.
And I think beyond the materials too, we have a lot of advice for this question.
Great, I love it.
I just think with that, I work primarily again with our business and management majors. And so the corporations and organizations I'm working with range from really small businesses all the way to businesses who are maybe getting 100, 200 applications per job posting. And so when if in ideal case, everybody's tailoring that resume and cover letter, like Megan's point, if you can work in a networking connection that you've had within the organization, or show that you've had some volunteer experience or how you've been connected with that organization before, that I think can be really beneficial in that cover letter space. And if that's an organization where you really don't have those connections to, LinkedIn can be a really great tool to see if there's any alum that currently work at the company that you could maybe connect with, or if there's somebody that you could maybe do an informational interview with or coffee chat. And that, if you haven't heard of it, is just a way to ask some questions ahead of maybe submitting that application to an organization too. So it can be a really great way to initiate some network connections if you don't have those at an organization as well. And so that LinkedIn tool can be really helpful, as well as just utilizing the people you already know. So if you have a neighbor or a friend, friend's parent, anybody that you know of that works at an organization, to definitely, if you can, reach out to have a conversation with them as well, just about what advice they may have about breaking into that company or industry too.
That's great advice, you guys. Thank you. Yeah, and it's such a, I mean, I love all the things that you shared about cover letters and resumes. These are just kind of, I think, topics that are going to surface a lot during our conversation today. So yeah, it was a really good one to start with. So, okay, our next question is, what advice do you have for older job seekers who maybe didn't graduate in their 20s? So maybe a non-traditional student, an adult learner, who we're seeing a lot more of at Grand Valley now. So yeah, any advice for individuals kind of maybe even a little closer to retirement age or older in their search? What would you share with them?
Yeah, I can jump in on this. And I think this kind of relates well to the cover letters that we were talking about before. But I think if you're closer to retirement, you've got a wealth of experiences that you've acquired over time. And those previous jobs all matter. So even if they're maybe not as directly related to that job search as you think they may be, we have a lot of great tools talking about transferable skills. And so we have a podcast episode on this. I think really just thinking through, like, what are each of the skills that I've had in previous positions that are contributing to this new experience, or what am I bringing to the table that's maybe a unique factor or skill set that maybe some other people in the field don't have. And so I think identifying that goal first, but then seeing how your past kind of connects all together. And so that, I think, really relates back to that cover letter, because then you, as a candidate, have that chance to really tell that story and kind of connect those dots for the employer. So why are all of those experiences, skills, organizations on your resume, why is that beneficial for you as a candidate moving forward? And then I think that networking piece as well, like if you're identifying employers of interest, I think we have a lot of companies, particularly in West Michigan, who are more open to conversations about making career pivots or just moving into a new space too. So those informational interviews, I think, can be really helpful in this scenario and case too, especially if you're maybe trying something new.
Yeah, and just to echo some of the things that Katie said too, I think your longevity in whatever it is that you're doing is going to be valued. And so I think something that you can do as an exercise is even doing like a career narrative. So giving yourself a non-judgmental space to just kind of write out like what has been your career journey, because I think it's easy for us to overlook things or to undersell ourselves. And so if you are able to give yourself some time to reflect and write or journal about that, that will give you some time to process everything that you've been doing and working on. And those might be longer stint things, or they might be shorter, time periods that you've had, but that still matters and it doesn't go away. And then that might help you to also identify a direction, like Katie was saying, like identifying what those skills are and also what you enjoyed, right? We want to make sure that you're feeling like you're doing some meaningful work with the time that how you want to spend, those years of working before retirement. And then you want to, hopefully from that, we'll be able to identify maybe some direction that you might be interested in, and that could help lead to some of those conversations that Katie was talking about. And we are pretty lucky in, I think, West Michigan, the Midwest, where, people are pretty open to maybe having some conversation, especially if it's like a curious conversation, right, where you're asking them for advice or insight. People love to share their knowledge in that way. And then you just want to be able to tell your story. So if you're just telling someone, oh, I just don't know what to do, I'm really stuck, that's an okay starting point, but you want to be able to give them some background so they have an understanding of like, okay, where could we start to move the needle or take that first next step?
And I think just to add on to that as well, with telling your story, I think we oftentimes maybe are cynical about our own experiences, or again, like Megan said, can overlook all the value we're bringing to roles, just because it can be hard to talk about ourselves and we tend to be more humble. So I think if you can share that story with a trusted, friend or mentor before you're kind of talking with employers too, they can hopefully help cheerlead and hype up those skills that you are bringing to the table. And again, we can kind of be hard on ourselves with how those past experiences may play to the future, but they really are valuable over time. And it makes your
If
story unique too.
Yeah, and if you're feeling really uncertain on like how do I even start this, on our website we do have a link. It's under our networking page, but there's even information on how to do an informational interview or a job shadow, and we break it down into how to identify people, how to initiate the conversation, and then what to do when you're actually in the conversation. There's a list of questions, but honestly, sometimes you can just ask a question or two, and then that person takes it from there and takes some of the pressure off of you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, this makes me think about an individual who actually came through our office not that long ago, like a couple of weeks ago. And she had been in the business world for, I don't know, 20, 30 years maybe, and was wanting to kind of pivot into more of a higher ed position, was looking into yeah, something within higher ed, but maybe just really wanting to help students and help people. And so she was doing an informational interview with one of her friends who works at Grand Valley, and stopped by our office and made some connections. And so, that was it's a perfect example of what you both just shared about that is, just asking good questions, talking to who you know, and getting more information can lead to some really good connections. So thank you for sharing that. Um, yeah. Okay, so we're going to move to just kind of more of a general question, but curious on how the job hiring process has changed in the last few years. What trends are we seeing? What changes have we noticed around that?
Yeah, Megan, feel free to jump in as well. I think this looks very different based on
Yeah.
industry sometimes as well. So,
Mm.
just trying to stay a little bit general, but I would say likely more of your initial screening calls or interviews may be a pre-recorded system. We see that quite a bit in larger corporations where you're doing either like a personality assessment or that phone screening is really a pre-recorded video, which can be a little bit different than I think what we're used to expecting during interviewing. And so sometimes you have one chance to record your answers, sometimes you have a couple chances, but then those answers are video recorded and sent to the company as part of an interview. So if you haven't had an interview situation like that, we do have a tool on our website called Big Interview, which I think is really helpful to help practice those answers. I also think if you just use your phone to record yourself, that can also be a really great way to see how you're presenting on a video. And then I think with that as well, just interviewing in general, we've talked a little bit about those applicant tracking systems, which are utilizing those scanning features to really see who the qualified candidates are ahead of time. So those keywords really do matter. But I think in addition to that, when everybody is using the similar keywords, that networking piece really comes into play too. Because if different resumes look pretty similar with the different types of skills, the piece that's going to set you above and beyond during that job search or with those interviews is if you've got those connections kind of ahead of time. And so if you can, again, do some volunteer work or have that informational interview ahead of time, if you can talk with a connection who works at the organization, I think that does help with that networking piece, and learning of maybe opportunities that you don't know of ahead of time.
Yeah, and I would add, I think technology is coming in, the job search process in so many ways, but I think sometimes that can feel overwhelming or outside of your control. And so I just say focus on what you can control with that. And so one thing is too is like just know the technology in your industry. And so if you can't know everything, all the technology, focus on what's happening in your industry, staying up to date on those types of trends and trying to get some experience in the technology that they're using. So that's one thing that will always, I think, help you is if you have that background. A while ago, we were concerned career fairs might go away or, are people still going to be using them? And ours have still had a pretty good turnout. And so I would really encourage, like, sometimes that face-to-face interaction, especially if applicants are having a hard time getting through just the online process. If you are able to get in front of someone, a career fair can be great. Our events are open to all alumni as well too. So I would encourage that as an option. Is I know things are changing and evolving, but still that human interaction still matters. And we're not just saying that as advisors, we're hearing it from employers. We have been asking them about, different ways that they can connect or how is AI influencing things. And they are really, a lot of them are still telling us, that human interaction is still really important. With interviewing, I think, in the job search process, because it's such a competitive market, I would say too, like really honing those interview skills, like Katie was saying. And I always say, if I could give any advice, it'd be concrete examples and relate it back. And so that STAR method, the situation, task, action, results, reflection. If you haven't heard of that before, we do have a podcast episode. I think we have a couple podcast episodes on it, but a lot of employers will use that as a way to do some evaluation with your interview skills. And what it really does is it takes your experience and connects it back to the position that you're applying to. So especially for those of you who might be doing some job transition, right? If you're like, okay, I've got, 5 to 10 years of experience, but it's not in this specific area. Does that mean all that time was wasted? No. What we would just encourage you to do is to do some career research, identify those things in this new area, have an understanding of what those things are, and then maybe think about the experiences that you have had. So if I were to use an example, if you had used some sort of technology in your previous job, maybe you used a software of some sort quite a bit, and then this company over here has a different software that you're using. And if they say, have you had experience in this? You might say, I haven't had experience in that. However, in my previous role, and then you would talk about how you utilize that previous technology, in what ways were you working with it daily? How did you help move it forward? Things like that. And then connect it back, if you taught yourself some of it, right? If you were self-directed in your learning with that, maybe it's like, I haven't done that. This new technology, I haven't utilized in that way, but I did teach myself this other technology. So I would just need some time to learn it. I really think I have the capacity to do that. Those are those transferable skills that we're talking about. So I think those are just some general things. And then also just to talk about, I know we're talking a lot about technology and AI, but with AI, it can be very tempting to use it to write your resume and your cover letter. But we want you to know it's just spitting out an output. So it doesn't have that personalization that only you can bring, right? And so if you are using it, you need to just go back and make sure it sounds like a human being wrote it, and that it sounds like you and not just anybody else who also put in the same input into AI and then it spit out the same cover letter. So you really want to tailor and personalize those materials.
And to Megan's point with that as well, if you are using AI as a tool, I think that can be a great way to add some of those keywords into your resumes and cover letters too. And as long as you can explain those keywords or how you use them in context in a previous position, I think that's a really good litmus test for, is this representative of my own skills too? So you can definitely tailor them a little bit more using those tools and still keep it personalized to you. And I think just the easiest way is if I were to say, tell me about that accomplishment statement. Can you provide that example that Megan was talking about in an interview question?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to prepare for an interview too, is just kind of going through your resume and finding stories that you can tell about each of your accomplishment statements. I think that would be, a really helpful, or just kind of like we were saying, kind of talking it through with a friend, telling your story with a friend, or practicing your interview with a friend and going through one by one and telling those stories can be a really helpful exercise. So, cool. Okay, so next question. So we're kind of we're doing some job search questions and we're kind of veering into career pivoting, and it's all kind of blending together because, right, these are all very common types of career topics. But someone asked about potentially going back to school. So they're looking at doing a career pivot or a career change, and looking at potentially getting another degree or a different degree in some way, shape, or form. How would you recommend they navigate that? And even looking into like the financial aspect of that too, right? We know that degrees are not free typically. So how would you recommend this person get started in that type of search?
That's a great question. I think we value education, right? And so we think going to school can be great. And we also think, there's a lot of value in the degree that you might already have. And so I think Katie and I might share a similar approach of before you go back to school, let's do our research, right? And see if that would be the appropriate next step for you. And so by doing your research, you want to see like, okay, what skills would this job or career industry, wherever direction I'm going, okay, what skills are needed? Do I have some transferable skills that could work for that? Are there ways to do it without going to school? And so sometimes there is, right? Maybe there is some on the job training that you could gain, or maybe you're gaining insight from other professionals. Maybe it's, oh, I'm going to get some work experience. Some people might do some side jobs or gig work or kind of entry level experience if they're able to make that happen and then just learn on the job. So, there's other ways that you can learn besides going back to school, or maybe you're reading books or listening to podcasts, any way that you can gather information. But if you ultimately decide that going to school would be the best way for you to elevate your career, then that's great. And we would recommend, making sure that you have a school that is a school and a program that's like the right fit for your needs. Do you need something that's, in person or online or a blend of those things? Or do you want to make sure that the experience that you're getting has some sort of hands-on experience that would help you to build your resume pretty specifically in the area that you're going into? And as far as costs, I think there's different ways to pay for education. And I think especially if you're thinking about grad school, I would encourage you to look at, if you're currently at an employer, they might offer some tuition reimbursement or tuition assistance of sorts. So I'd really encourage people to take a look at that. There's also options in some programs for graduate assistants or research assistants, and those are positions that students usually have at a university. And then they can college or university, and they work for the institution, and then there's some sort of tuition funding that might be happening for that student. So that's another option.
Yeah, I think Megan covered really everything I was going to say as well. We want you to have the experience that's most beneficial for you. And if that education or continuing education, going back to school is something that you really need to be successful in that career, I think we would encourage that. But there are so many tools and research methods out there that I think can really help provide some insight on whether additional certification is needed or whether that's something you can pivot into without having that additional schooling. And I will say as well, if that is something that you're interested in, like Megan said, finding a program that works for you. Grand Valley in particular does have adult student services specialists who will walk through some of those funding opportunities or the education paths available based on your previous credentials. And so other schools probably have similar resources, or if they don't, that's something that I would recommend talking with a faculty member in the program about, or an advisor. And just yeah, if you can switch without having to get that additional credential as well, I think that kind of relates back to all of the things we were mentioning before with those career pivots of just really focusing on that transferability of what you're already bringing to the table and really talking about why is what I've done before beneficial for this new position or role, or what skill sets, what personality traits am I bringing to this that really are beneficial and align really well.
There are some short-term training too. So it might be something short, like a certificate or a boot camp that you might be attending. But whatever you go through, you just want to make sure that it is an accredited program and the appropriate credentials for what you're looking for.
And industry certified if you can as well. I know there's a lot of different certification programs out there. You probably get LinkedIn messages about different programs. And so just making sure that whatever positions you're applying for have that kind of expectation or that qualification listed too. You may not need that additional certification moving forward too.
Awesome. So I know there are a few questions that came in that were specific to the field of public health. And like I said, we want to keep our questions as broad as we can. But since there were so many that came in, and Megan is specifically working with healthcare career communities, I wanted to kind of bring up the public health questions. And maybe just ask you, Megan, just kind of your thoughts around resumes. So one of the questions was around like extracurriculars or certifications, or even particular things that recruiters are looking for on resumes within the public health field. What would you recommend? What are you hearing about that would be helpful to know?
Yeah, I think, just being aware of kind of the landscape of the industry. And, there are some challenges with funding right now. I think that some organizations within public health are kind of working through. And so that can bring some limitations and can make hiring and job searching challenging for both the employer and the job seeker. So I think some things you can do is, again, go back to that strategy of maybe identifying like, okay, what direction would I like to move forward with? And something that's can still be helpful. So in the chat, Kyle has been graciously putting in some different resources, and we have on our career resources page, there's a website called What Can I Do with This Major, right? And you might be thinking, okay, great, is this for younger students? And yeah, we use it all the time because we think there's still a lot of value in it because it gives you some vocabulary and language that you can be utilizing. So, and sometimes it's just like we've forgotten about those things because we've been so focused in one area and we've kind of forgotten, like, oh, yeah, there's these other skills and opportunities. So maybe going back to that page and looking at like the different subcategories within the field to see if there's a direction that you want to move forward with. For this website too, you might need to access it through our Career Center website or through the career resources page, just because sometimes if you click on the link, it'll ask you to pay a fee, and we've already paid that for our users. So feel free to access it through the resources site. And then when you go, if you were to click on public health, it will give you like that list of different subcategories within the field. And so that can be great for articulating maybe some of the skills that you've kind of maybe haven't presented as much to an employer or haven't talked about, even if you have those skills, or maybe you want to gain those skills. So then we could use that as a way to identify that. The other thing is at the bottom of those pages, there are lists of like public health job boards and public health professional organizations and places where you can get certifications. And so I encourage people to really go back to that page, the What Can I Do with This Major, and use those additional links at the bottom. You can also think about, if you need to zoom out a little bit, right? So of course, maybe our goal is, oh, I'd love to be doing, research on maternal health or something like that. And we're just not seeing some of those jobs we're not seeing maybe a lot of those job postings, or maybe we're geographically bound. So we can't just up and move to Florida or something like that, right? So if we do need to zoom out a little bit, that's where you can really assess like, what skills do I have? Well, if it's researching skills, right? Or, I've been good at assessment. I've been doing some surveying, some of those types of skills. Okay, where else can I maybe use those skill sets that I have? Maybe it's working like the state of Michigan. They have a variety of departments. They take people with a variety of majors, but that might be a place where you can utilize some of your interest areas. Or is it that, yeah, ideally I'd love to be working for a county health department, but maybe you're working for an organization that is focused on health outcomes for people. So I'm thinking about like Epic comes to mind, or other companies kind of within the healthcare industry. You might sometimes not initially think like, oh, they're doing the work that I want to be doing. But as you start to look at some of the job postings, you might actually see like, oh, actually they are doing some of these things. Sometimes a job title isn't exactly what you would naturally think it would be. So that's why it's so important to even just read postings, kind of flip through a lot of them. And because every company, it might look a little bit different. So unfortunately, I know it is a challenging time for public health. But I would also say the public health department does put out a pretty solid email with a lot of resources within it. So if you need to get reconnected to that, what I would do is just reach back out to the public health department at Grand Valley if you are an alum for that program, and ask to be added back onto that listserv, because there's some really cool resources. It has a list of job postings, what's happening in the news, volunteer opportunities, practicum listings, but places where you can either get to know employers or start to have an understanding of kind of a nice one-stop shop of opportunities that were curated by the department that we have alumni at. It can be a good resource.
I think, and just to add on to what Meghan is saying as well, even though this is more public health focused, and so you're looking more probably into public spaces, public service, government, nonprofit, I do think there are a lot of opportunities in the private corporation world that value those skill sets as well. And I can think of a particular employer who does some first aid and safety training and training and development for different organizations. And so they've had previous teachers, previous public health workers kind of go into those spaces because the skill sets are really aligned too. So to Megan's point, I think just be a little bit open as well if you're interested in kind of expanding those opportunities to what private organizations and companies may have to offer with your skill sets as well.
Excellent. Thank you both. So, talking a little bit more about resumes, I'm curious to know, is a one-page resume a standard? That's kind of first part of the question. And then even just kind of beyond that, what are some resume building best practices? I mean, there is so much information out there. And I know Kyle shared our resume guide, which has some really good tips on what to include, what to add, but you guys are both resume experts. Like, what are some really good building blocks? And what are some of those like expectations maybe around length and experience? Especially for folks who maybe have been in their careers for a little bit of time. So,
Yeah, I can start with this one. Yeah, I think especially working with business and corporations, single page resumes are still the standard and expectation for resumes, regardless kind of how long you've been in the field. If you're looking at C-suite positions or those really senior leadership levels, you may have longer CVs or curriculum vitas. Those are also more common, I would say, if you're applying to graduate school or looking at positions in research, government, education. But for the most part, industry is still expecting a one-page resume 10, 20, 30 years into that job search. And so that can be, I think, a really difficult feat when you've had so much experience and you want to focus on all of the things that you're bringing to the table. And I think that's where really getting specific with that resume and kind of doing what Megan suggested earlier, you may have different resume samples for different jobs. And so one might focus on your relevant experiences and your job history. Others may have more of a skill summary, and then you're not going in as much depth within each job role that you have listed. Or I worked with a student one time who was transitioning back to corporate from the education sphere. And so even though the job that she had worked in corporate was a really long time ago, that was the first thing she listed on her resume to really showcase that relevancy. And so really kind of regardless of the length of your resume, I would say highlighting those skills and experiences that are really important for that new role is going to be the most important thing. And then any like credentials or skills that go above and beyond that would add to that position are really what I would focus on kind of next in that resume or application. And I think that's, again, where the cover letter can kind of come in as a nice tool as well. Gives you some more space to really explain where you're transitioning to and why.
And I would say, in other industries, healthcare and education is maybe a place where we might see some longer resumes, but we usually say 2 pages max, unless it was a CV, which is more common in like research and academia. But a 2-page resume isn't necessarily better than a 1-page resume. Our biggest focus is that it should be relevant experience. It's a snapshot. It's not everything you've ever done. Now, if you're a new grad, it might feel like sometimes it can feel hard to fill a page, right? And so if that's happening to you, we encourage you like, okay, that usually is a sign that either you need more experience or maybe you're overlooking some things, and there might be some things where we can talk more about it. I think if you're a career transitioner, you can use like a summary statement at the top, like a professional summary. Might say something about, have 5 years experience in this field, looking to make a career pivot to this field, skills in X, Y, and Z. So there are some things that can help kind of lead or anchor the resume at the top. So that way people who are reviewing it have a sense of if things aren't matching perfectly. But again, always connecting back. So with those bullet points, trying to connect back to what's on that original job posting, I think could be really key.
awesome. Thank you. So kind of thinking through, resume and just even building, like you kind of touched on this a little bit, Megan, but like building some of those additional skills or, maybe you're looking for opportunities, but you don't have experience. Like where would you start to look for those kinds of opportunities. And Katie, jump in as well if you have thoughts on that too.
Yeah, so sorry to add to the building of it. So we understand that your time might be very limited in some ways, right? Like you might not be in a position where you can like, just quit your job and move to something else. And how do I get these experience? And you might need to be paid, right? And so here are some ways to think about it. Like where you're currently working now, is there a way that you can build some of those skills while you're working now? You might be itching to make a little bit of a transition, but sometimes that takes time and there's a lot of things that are a little bit outside of your control. So what can you do in your current role now to start building some of the skills that you might need for that future role that you're interested in, either at that company or outside of that company or industry? So I would see if there's maybe a strategy that you can build from that, just because that's seems maybe the most accessible in some ways and a good use of everyone's time. Another way would be maybe volunteering. So I know that sometimes can be a little bit challenging with time, but employers like to see volunteering on a resume. It's a good way to get your foot in the door somewhere. You're doing good work, you're fulfilling a need within the community, but also you're going to get the opportunity to network with the people that potentially already work there. Or you're meeting with other volunteers. So you're just basically adding to your network, and you might be able to build some skills in those areas. Another thing, we have some people who will do like some part time jobs or some gig work. And so even like looking on Handshake, which is our job board. We talk a lot about LinkedIn and Indeed, but Handshake can still be utilized for our alumni. And so if you are looking on there, there might be even some just like part-time jobs that maybe you could squeeze in. I know it's hard to work and then also get another job, but you might be able to do, maybe it's like, oh, I'm doing this for about, 5 to 10 hours a week, or maybe even less than that. But maybe if you do that for 6 months, okay, now you've got some significant experience that you can at least talk about from a longevity standpoint. And that might be kind of that entry level foot in the door or skill building activity that you could do to kind of bolster that resume.
And I think too, to Megan's point, all of those are great ways to maybe add on to experience that you already have. But we meet with students all the time who claim they have no experience. And then when we start breaking down all of the jobs they've had, all of the things they've done in those jobs and positions, we're able to identify quite a few skill sets or accomplishments, projects they've worked on that really are pretty relevant to the jobs they're applying for. And so it may not be the most directly related or industry experience either, but I think reframing that level of experience that you have, it may not again be directly related, but if you can talk about how you've done this in one setting and how it might transfer over, like Megan's technology skill before, or I had a teacher who was moving into an accounting field. And so she talked a lot about how she would manage grading and assessments and how that skill set would play into her accounting degree. And so there's a lot of different ways to really think about like those transferable skills back and forth between positions too. And I know we've mentioned that a lot today. You've heard us say transferable skills so many times, but I do really think it is an underutilized aspect of the job search. And I think that's the piece where you can really kind of explain to an employer, a new employer, when you're pivoting, what you're bringing to the table too, if you don't have that direct experience in the industry.
Mm-hmm. I just don't think like we think of transferable skills as often as we should, right? Or it's just something that's so easy to forget. So I love that you both are bringing that up so much, because so many of the questions we got were around, resume building, career pivoting, job search, and those transferable skills is going to be, like your best friend throughout that entire process, just to really show what you have accomplished, what you've done, what, strengths you have, and how you would use that in your next role is going to be huge. So yes, we've said it a lot, but we said it a lot for a reason. So
And I think,
yeah.
sorry, to add on to that as
Yeah.
well, like I think you do have to be prepared to maybe do a bit more explanation. Like we met with a student yesterday who had applied to a grad program, and she was talking about an organization she had worked at that was a smaller organization in her region, was applying to a grad school outside of the like region that she was working in. And she was surprised that she had to do quite a bit of explanation to say what the organization did, what their mission was. And so if you are switching industries or career paths a little bit, I think it's okay to be a little bit more detailed with some of your explanations to be able to really hone in on those skills that you're bringing and why they're transferable over. So you may have to be prepared to like do some code switching, translation between, one field and another. But if you can kind of be specific about how you're doing that, can really help as well.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. So we'll do one more question, and then I want to leave just a few minutes at the end. If anyone else in the on the call today has a specific question they want to ask. So the one that we'll kind of end with here is just best practices to securing that first interview. So, let's say someone has applied to a role, and maybe it's a new field even. What would you say are some best practices that they could really, land that interview with that new organization that they're looking into?
We've said this earlier too, but I really do think researching the organization or companies that you're interested in applying to is really key. It's just going to make you more knowledgeable and make you feel better about it if you're applying to a place, if you're wondering if it's a good fit for you. But there's lots of ways that you can do that. So yes, you can go to their website, but they also want to see that maybe you've done more digging than just like what's on their website, right? So ways that you can learn from organizations or about organizations is you can go on their website, which a lot of times is going to be more customer facing. But if you go on their LinkedIn page, you can see if the company has a LinkedIn page. From there, you might also be able to see if there's people that have worked at that company. And so just asking them questions about the organization. A lot of organizations too have like a social media page. Or if it's a large organization, maybe it's just like one specific department that you search. And sometimes that can give you some insight too. Taking a look at if you do a Google search of them, what type of current events are coming up? Are they involved in the community? What's the population that they're supporting? What initiatives do they have moving forward? If you can, sometimes it can be hard to find this depending on the organization, but especially in a nonprofit, like finding their strategic plan, you might be able to find that information and thinking about like, okay, how would I fit into this? Is this company moving in the direction that I want to be moving in as well? And then, framing questions in the interview about some of those things can be helpful. Just, it really shows that you've put in the effort to learn about them. And I think any type of curiosity, like genuine curiosity, is really valued by employers because they view that as like, this person has interest and motivation. And maybe they don't know everything, right? None of us know everything, but maybe they don't know everything. But man, do they seem like they're really invested? And we want someone at the heart of our organization to be like that.
I think additionally too, and we mentioned this earlier as well, but the recruiters we talk to are still doing in-person events. They're networking, they're attending conferences. And a lot of the times when we talk with recruiters as well, the people they're interviewing and the people that are making it to those final rounds of interviews are people they've connected with before, whether that's a LinkedIn message, whether that's at that career event, at a conference, somebody that they knew who was just searching for a position that was in their network before they were looking for that job. And so I think if you can do that follow up with a recruiter or make sure that you're intentional about maybe connecting with those people outside of submitting that application online, that does kind of help, I think, set you apart from other applicants. One easy way to do this too is to just follow up on your applications. I think a lot of us, and I'm guilty of it as well, just going through the application process, will submit that application and then wait to hear back. And so that is something you have to do as part of the process. But if I haven't heard back within a week or so, something that you can do, and this is where Handshake can come in handy as well. But if you can find that recruiter or hiring manager for that position and send them a note, just really inquiring about the timeline for the position, restating that interest, restating some of the skills that you're bringing to the role, having that call to action, and not just saying, hey, I'm really excited for this opportunity, but having that call to action to maybe initiate that conversation can be a good way to set yourself apart as well. And to just restate your interest in that. If you're persistent, you want to be persistent, maybe not pesky with those follow-ups too. So kind of 1 to 2 follow-ups, but I think that can be a really great way to just re-engage that connection or try to follow up on those applications as well. And easier said than done. There's not always direct contact information listed, but that's where I think LinkedIn and Handshake can be really great tools where you can oftentimes see who's posted that position when it is in that online application space.
you might be feeling really overwhelmed by all this information that we've been giving too. And so I just think like doing a little bit at a time, right? So
Yeah.
maybe it's like, this week my goal is to send out 3 reach outs and see what happens. Or it's like go for the simplest thing that you can to start to motivate yourself to kind of gain some traction. So if it's like, okay, I'm going to reach out to, my friend's sister works in this organization. I'm going to reach out to her. And then you've met with someone who's you're comfortable with, but then you might be able to ask, like, do you have, I think whenever you do an informational interview or a reach out, you could always say, thank them for their time, but then also ask, like, do you have someone else in mind that you think it would be beneficial for me to connect with? And then that's kind of a slower, I shouldn't say slower, but like a nice way to grow your network is through just kind of these genuine interactions that you have. When you are applying for jobs, we really do recommend that you track what you're applying to, put the company down, your reason why you applied to them, the position, because sometimes an employer, you don't hear from them for, it could be several weeks. And then all of a sudden they're calling you and you're like, wait, what was the position that I even applied to? So keeping track of that. And then also if you were to work with, a career coach or something, you can show them, you have some evidence to show them, hey, here's what I've been doing. And then maybe they will notice a trend. They might have some insight into the approach that you're taking. But if you just say, oh, I've applied to all these jobs and I haven't heard of anything, and then you can't remember any of those positions, it's hard for us to help move people forward in a new direction if we don't really know where they're coming from. And then I also recommend just sending a thank you note when you do interact with someone, because people will remember that. And then, if something does come up in the future, so maybe they don't have something right now, but if something does come up in the future, they might keep the note. They will remember the fact that you were so genuine about it. And so they can really go a long way.
I think to Megan's point too, just staying organized with your job search it sounds maybe like, yes, I should be doing that, but it can really help with those extra steps or those things that you don't maybe think of doing naturally, like the thank you notes or the follow-ups. And I think it also just helps take some of that pressure off. You have kind of a process for how you're moving forward with those applications. And I think it can be a really great way just to, I think, take the pressure off again. Like it's a big process applying to jobs. All of you who are considering changing careers or pivoting, we know it's a lot of work. It's a lot of mental energy. And so I think if you can organize it for yourself the best that you can, hopefully that takes some of that mental energy off. And we do have a resource called Rain on our website as well. In that career resources page, if that is something you're interested in doing, you don't love Excel sheets for organization or just want that kind of more automated process, that is a resource that has some really great job tracking tools that you can keep track of your applications, and it'll be all in one place for you to see, because no one wants to be searching through their email inbox. That's not a fun task. So that is a resource too that hopefully can help maybe minimize the mental energy of that job search.
Applying for jobs really is a full-time job in itself. So we empathize that it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's so true. Thank you both so much. This is incredibly helpful. We have just a few minutes left, so if you have a question that didn't get answered today, go ahead and throw that in the chat, or use the raise hand feature if you'd like to unmute and ask a question. We can hang out for a few more minutes and keep talking about all things career. But yeah, also thank you to Kyle for sending all the links. We'll try to include some of those links in your follow-up as well with the recording. There's so much good information out there. And I know, yeah, when you're in the thick of it, it can be overwhelming. It can be exhausting. It can be discouraging and draining. And so we just want you to know that there's so much out there to support you and help you through that process, and hopefully make it a little bit less cumbersome as you navigate, the pivoting or applying to different jobs. So, yeah, that organizational piece is very, very, you can't underestimate how helpful that can be, when you're in the middle of anything like a job search. So, glad you both brought that up.
I just want to add as well, if you came to this today, hopefully you're walking away knowing that you're already bringing really great things to the table in any space. So yeah, we're here as a resource and would love if you have any more questions to help answer those as well.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. All right, I'm not seeing any other questions come in. We'll wait just another minute. But yeah, any other, Megan, Katie, any other last words, advice at all?
Yeah, I just think sometimes a strategy can be like, okay, kind of doing a checkpoint with yourself. Like, all right, if I'm not getting through, if I'm not getting any interviews, do I need to take a look at my materials and networking strategy? If I'm interviewing and not moving on to the next round, do I need to work on my interviewing? Now that's of course overly simplistic. You could be great and maybe you're just missing out because it's really a competitive pool and um, it could just be there can be economic concerns, right? So really with applying to jobs, it's not always in your control. So there's a lot of things working at the same time, but if you can be pretty strategic with what you're doing, that can sometimes just be the most efficient way to be approaching things.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to just thank everyone so much for joining us today. Megan, Katie, thank you so much for your wisdom, your good advice, super helpful. And like I said, we will send you the recording afterwards. And we do have another Ask an Advisor session coming up next month. I believe it's on July 28th. Let me check my calendar just to make sure. Nope, it's not July 28th. What day is it? It's July 29th, Wednesday, July 29th. So I'm glad I checked. So we'll have two more career advisors on the call next month to answer more of your questions. So please feel free to join us if you still have some lingering job search questions, resume questions, networking, all of the above. So hope everyone has a good rest of the day, and we'll see you at another webinar soon. Thanks.
Thank you.